Good morning and welcome to Greece. My name's Andrew and I live here, and today I'm at the Acropolis. In fact, I'm going to walk around Athens while I make this video and show you the sights. But if you want to do the same thing, if you want to move to Greece, if you want to settle here as I've managed to, then I think there are 10 key challenges you need to prepare for in advance and overcome. So I'm going to talk about those in this video today, and most importantly as well, how I would deal with them or how I have dealt with them. So I hope it's useful to you. So my first challenge for many of you is probably going to be the biggest challenge of all, and that is simply, do you have the right to reside in Greece? And if not, how are you going to obtain that right? Because you're suddenly looking at visas and residency and citizenship. And I do have a video on it, so I'm not going to go into great detail here. But if you're a digital nomad, if you're a retiree, if you have money, most contentiously, or perhaps you're working here, then there are options available to you, but you need to explore those in a legal sense. So very quickly, as a summary, really there are 3, maybe 4 options available to you. The first is birthright. Do you have parents, grandparents who were born in the European Union, or specifically Greece in this case, and would allow you to obtain a passport as a result? The second is marriage. Now, that's where I fall into. I'm married to a Greek. I'm very lucky. It doesn't guarantee you residency, but you'd be pretty unlucky, if I'm honest with you, not to get residency here as a result of a marriage to a Greek. And thirdly and finally, money or job. If you have sufficient funds, and I find this a bit contentious, but if you have sufficient funds to either invest in Greece or to buy yourself a golden visa, you probably also can buy yourself some residency time here. So that is a big challenge. I get a lot of people who come to me and say, Andrew, we'd love to live in Greece. What options are available to us? And I say, well, the first thing you've got to consider is, do you actually have the right to live here? And if not, what are you going to do in order to obtain that right? It's a problem. You need to research it and be very clear before you come that you're going to be able to do that properly and legally. Otherwise, to be honest, the other 9 are irrelevant. It's a little bit of a non-starter. So, assuming that you've got the right to reside here, we come on to challenge number 2, which is probably not going to be a surprise to a number of you, but it is Greek bureaucracy. And rightly, Greek bureaucracy is notorious. But I must say it has got a lot better in the last few years, because the whole process has been largely digitised and continues to be. And it does make things a lot easier, because you can find things online, you can file things online, and so on. However, you have to understand that all of this is in Greek, so you will probably need some help. Now, it may be that you've used a lawyer in your dealings with the Greek visa process. A lawyer is very helpful. They will help you navigate this process. I would also strongly recommend that you get an accountant. Everyone in Greece has an accountant, generally for tax, because tax changes all the time, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But an accountant, an English-speaking accountant in particular, one who's proactive, will help you manage the bureaucracy significantly. And finally, you want to use what's known as the KEP here, K-E-P. Every town and major village in Greece has at least one, and that is effectively the Citizens Advice Bureau here. They often have people who speak numerous languages, French, German, English, etc., and they are very, very helpful. They will guide you through the process. They will help you fill in the documents. They will get the necessary numbers and details for you that otherwise you might struggle to understand yourself. But you will have to deal with the bureaucracy, and my advice is get help around you. At the very least, KEP won't charge, but also, as I said, an accountant, a lawyer, and they will charge. So number 3, sounds simple, but it really isn't, and that is finance. I am not talking about your finances, although this is an element of it. I'm assuming that you are in control of your finances. You can either afford to live here, or you'll be working here and you have the rights to do so. What I'm talking about is finances from the perspective of the Greek state and the bureaucracy. First and foremost, you have to have a tax number here. Now, that is the absolute first thing you should do if you are moving to Greece, beyond the visa, because without a tax number, you can't do anything. You can't hire a car, you can't get a mobile phone contract, nothing. Everything here revolves around your AFAMI, or your tax number, and that's what they call it in Greece, their AFAMI. And this is where your accountant comes in. If you take my advice and you get an accountant, the accountant will be able to help you sort out an AFAMI. It's not a difficult thing to do, provided you have the legal rights to remain here. But without it, you cannot do anything. Trust me. Everything that you want to do here will check your AFAMI to make sure that you are not owing tax. If you owe tax, you can't buy a car. If you owe tax, you can't get a mobile phone contract. So it's rather important. You also have to file a tax return every year. Again, without the AFAMI, you can't do that. They sound wonderful, great, I'll come to Greece, I won't pay tax. fine, that's what people used to do rather a lot. But unless you get the tax number, unless you show a tax return every year, unless you pay your taxes every year, you cannot do anything here. So you have to sort that out. The second thing you then have to do is open a bank account. Now, it's not absolutely critical that you open a bank account here, but I would suggest strongly that you do, because A, it facilitates payments, and B, if let's say you want to rent somewhere or buy somewhere, it shows that you're serious about it, and it will enable you to do that much more easily. And again, without the AFME, without the tax number, you cannot open a bank account here. I would also say, every time you want to do anything like that here, open a bank account, get a credit card, etc., you not only have to show your tax number, you also have to give full financial disclosure of your worldwide income. Now, not everyone wants to do that, and you don't have to do that, but if you choose not to do that, you are going to be limited in the banking options that are available to you here in Greece. And I think it's very important that you're aware of that. So, you've determined you have the right to live here, you've dealt with the Greek bureaucracy, you've sorted out your institutional finances, shall we say, and now you need somewhere to live. Now, that is entirely down to you as to where you want to live, how much you want to spend, whether you want to buy or rent. What I would say is Athens is expensive, and no one lives in the centre. If you're going to live in Athens, you want to look at the residential suburbs, places like Halandri, Bureaucracy, Glyphada, and if you are looking further afield, I would suggest strongly the Peloponnese, accessible to Athens, accessible to the airports. Now, many of you will want to live in the islands, but I would caution against this unless they're one of the larger islands. There are 7 islands with populations greater than 30,000 all year round. I would suggest they're probably reasonable, but anything less, you're going to struggle with things like access to airports, all year round ferries, decent amenities which are open all year round, and healthcare and things like that. So you really need to think about it. And inevitably, Athens is the most expensive, but also be aware of the fact that property declines in value as it ages. So I'm doing up a 1970s property at the moment. It's worth significantly less than something built after, say, 2000, because the building standards have changed, the insulation has changed, etc. Now, I have a very modern apartment down in the Peloponnese. It costs us virtually nothing to heat it in the winter, but the Athens apartment, it's horrific. It's uninsulated, it's got single wall skins and so on. So you need to go into this with open eyes, but only you can decide where you want to live, what matters to you, and how much you can afford. Now, buying property here is pretty complicated legally, I'll be honest with you. Even the Greeks struggle to navigate it sometimes. So you may want to get yourself a really decent English-speaking lawyer. You also need to be careful, because a lot of property here, particularly built before about 2010, 2011, was technically built illegally. There will be an aspect of that property, maybe the size, maybe the shape, maybe the number of bedrooms, maybe even the land, which makes it illegal. And the government is catching up on this and will levy fines on you heavily when they find out, particularly if the property was built after 1975. So my advice is be really cautious if you're buying property here. That said, I think buying property here is a very sensible decision, not as an investment, but as a home, because property prices are going up, rents are going up. Here in Athens, you could easily be paying anything from, let's say, €9 per square metre to 15 or 16 euros per square metre per month, and that's gone up 20% in the last year. Out in the suburbs, I mean the Peloponnese, areas an hour, 2 hours from here, you might be looking at more 7 to 9 euros per square metre per month. So take your pick, but be cautious, because a lot of people, unfortunately, in Greece will take the opportunity to rip you off if they can. It doesn't mean that the Greeks are bad, it just means there are some bad Greeks, as there are in every country. There are bad people. So as a foreigner, take advice, breathe deeply, and be careful. So, you're now in Greece, you have somewhere to live, you need to get around. How are you going to do that? Well, in Athens, I would strongly suggest you use public transport. There's good bus network, and there's a metro. You can see the metro here. I would strongly advise using it. It goes everywhere in Athens, it's highly reliable, and it's relatively cheap. Beyond that, you could use the buses in Athens, and also taxis. Taxis aren't that expensive. They are expensive for the Greeks, obviously, but they're not that expensive compared to other European cities. But outside Athens, you may well need a car. And if you're going to get a car, my advice is strongly, if you can, buy your own outright. The list prices of new cars here in Greece is not bad compared to the rest of Europe. They're amongst some of the better value list prices. And it's the easiest way to ensure that you don't get ripped off, to be honest. The used car market here is a nightmare. Used cars are expensive, and it's difficult to find decent examples, particularly as a foreigner, without getting ripped off. So you really need to know what you're doing if you want to get a used car. You can obviously also finance a car. Hertz, Avis, etc. They will finance a car for you. They're very common here when it comes to financing cars, but they will charge you a premium, probably around about 20% of the list value of the car, in order to finance it for you. Some of you may be thinking, oh, well, I'll just rent a car anyway. Well, legally, short-term rental, you can only rent a car for up to 28 days here. So beyond that, you really need to look at other options. And outside Athens, as I said, I really would advise having some sort of personal private car if you can, because otherwise it becomes a little bit of a challenge to get around. It's perfectly reasonable to do so, but a car makes it a lot easier. That said, the bus network, the national bus network here is fantastic. The KTEL, K-T-E-L. You can find the timetables online. They have regional bus depots in places like Argos, Lamia, Kalamata, and the buses are reliable and regular. If you want to travel in the winter, there are fewer buses, but they're empty. If you travel in the summer, there are a lot more buses, but particularly in July and August, you will need to pre-book. Outside those months, don't worry about it. You can probably just buy a ticket on the day. But July and August, if you want to travel on the bus network here, you really need to pre-book. But the bus network here is excellent, and I would advise it strongly over the trains. The train network here is very limited and in significant disrepute. I'm not going to go into the details of why, but Greeks do not travel on the train here, and neither should you, in my opinion. It's not safe to do so. But some of you will then say, well, Andrew, we want to live in the islands. We want to use ferries. Fair enough. It's a little bit like the bus network. The ferry network here is extremely good, but in the winter it's subject to change. The timetables reduce significantly. You're not necessarily going to have daily sailings from the smaller islands, and you're not going to be able to travel between the smaller islands as you can in the summer. So don't think that it's exactly the same as it is in the summer. That said, it's perfectly viable to do so as long as you are patient. It is subject to change. Weather, etc., can make a difference, and I'll talk about weather in a few minutes. But in Athens, if you need a car, get a car. It's not impossible to drive around Athens. Parking's a nightmare. I wouldn't advise it. Use public transport. Outside Athens, if you can get your own car, do so. Otherwise, the bus network is fantastic. So now you're living in Greece and you're travelling around and you're having fun. Unfortunately, at some point, you are going to need to access healthcare facilities. It's just a sad fact of life. And the good news is that here in Greece, healthcare is, in my opinion, amongst some of the best in Europe because it's advanced, it's accessible, it's affordable, and the healthcare professionals here are highly, highly trained. Now, as a foreigner living in Greece, you want to get yourself what's known as an AMCA. This is the Greek healthcare number, and provided you're paying taxes in here, yes, we're back to taxes again, and provided you are resident here, you have the right legally to get an AMCA. Now that won't necessarily pay for all of your medicines and so on, because that will only contribute to the costs of these if you're actually working here in Greece and providing money into a national insurance plan. But what it will do is allow you to go to a hospital in an emergency and be treated. So it's very important to try and get an AMCA. Beyond that, you need private healthcare, and there are two types of private healthcare. The first is a rip-off. When you apply for residency here, not necessarily a visa, but a residency, you have to get a specific private healthcare plan. It costs €80, and if you don't get that, they won't give you the residency visa. It's ridiculous because it offers you no healthcare benefits, it offers you no support should you need it, but it is an insurance policy that you have to take out in order to get the residency visa. Beyond that, you need to get a real healthcare policy, and typically for two people it's probably 100 to 120 euros a month, but that will give you access to some fantastic private hospitals, particularly in Athens. And I said that surgery and access to private healthcare is affordable here. It really is. I can see a consultant for €50 and I can see her tomorrow. I can seek medical attention and it will cost me nothing like it will in Northern Europe. So don't be put off by the fact that you're in Greece and therefore healthcare must be a problem. It isn't, particularly if you're able to pay for it, and I would advise getting a private healthcare policy. My number 7 is, for many people actually, one of the biggest challenges in relocating to a different country, and that is one of cultural integration. Now, I'm extremely lucky. I happen to have lived and worked in China and then subsequently Vietnam before I came here, so I guess I've got some experience of this. But a lot of people move overseas and undergo what essentially is a cultural shock. I don't know why. They expect perhaps things to be more familiar than they are. They expect the lifestyle to be the same and so on. The reality is it often isn't. Socially, these countries are very different to each other. You can't come to Greece and expect it to be like America, or come from the UK and expect it to be like the UK. It is Greece, and it's about a mindset. You have to go with the flow here. It's really critical. We used to have a saying in Vietnam, TIV, this is Vietnam. You just have to accept life as it comes. And if you can't go with the flow, it becomes a real problem for people. The people who I dealt with in Vietnam in particular, but also China, who didn't stay very long, never accepted the fact that it was a different country to that which they came from. And you really just have to have the right mindset. As I said, it's a real challenge for people, and one that you should not underestimate. You can do all the preparation in the world, but when you get here, it's a shock, and you have to deal with that. And just go with the flow. Now, my number 8 here goes hand in hand with cultural integration, and that is the challenge of learning the Greek language. And that is a real challenge. I have to tell you, I've been involved in Greece for 25 years now, and my Greek language is still extremely poor. It's embarrassingly so. And that's probably down to me. That's probably because I'm not very good at languages, but it's also an extremely difficult language to learn. And I think that's because, in principle, when you speak English, generally we stress the first syllable of every word. So when you listen to someone talking in English, you can differentiate the words because of the stress on the first syllable of each word. In Greek, that is not the case. It could be that they stress the second or third or 27th syllable of the word. And let's face it, in Greek, some words are extremely long. And that makes it really difficult when you're learning the language to listen to someone, to occur, to hear someone, and to differentiate the different words they're saying. But that said, it's also really important that you do learn Greek if you can. Not only will it make it easier to live here, but it will also mean that you're no longer treated as a tourist, and you don't want to be treated as a tourist. You want to get into a taxi and have a conversation with someone and actually participate culturally in the country, and you learn things by doing so. But something I've started recently is managing expectations. So whenever I start a conversation with someone I don't know, the taxi driver on the way down here this morning, I will start off by saying something like "Gya σας, είμαι Anglos, sinomi, milao etsiketsi," which means "Good morning, I'm English, sorry about that, but I only speak so-and-so." And it manages expectation. I found it makes a huge difference then to the conversations I can have with people, because instantly they don't expect too much of me. They speak more clearly and deliberately. Perhaps they use simpler words, and it just makes my life easier. As I said, it's only something I've started doing recently. It's a huge revelation to me. So my advice is you start off with the basics. How you get around, dexia, aristra, right and left. Where you're going, what the time of day is, how you order food in a restaurant, how you buy food in a supermarket. Miso kilo mortadella fetes per kilo, half a kilo of mortadella sliced. And then you build from there. Verbs are extremely difficult. They have different tenses, they have different genders. It's a complicated and ancient language, but one that is well worth learning if you can. You're probably much better than me. You'll probably learn it in 2 years. I'm still trying after 25. Having said that you should culturally integrate here in Greece and learn the language, I'm now going to contradict myself, because one of the things I really value and really miss is the opportunity to talk in my own tongue, English, with people of a similar background, people who perhaps grew up in Northern Europe, at the very least, people who are English, ideally. And that's not always easy. Now, if you're in Athens, it's relatively simple to get in touch with foreigners of similar background to yourself. They may not be English, they may be American, they may be Canadian, etc. But the point is, we're all guests here in Greece, we're all foreigners here in Greece, we all have similar experiences and learning that we can share together. And you can do that via Facebook groups and so on. Out in the suburbs, in the Peloponnese, for example, in some of the smaller islands, it's very difficult for foreigners such as myself to get together and meet with people. And I do love sitting down and having lunch sometimes with English or Canadians or Americans or Dutch, and I have friends in all those nationalities. And for me, actually, quite simply, the way that I met most of my friends was through this YouTube channel. People who live in Greece or in a similar situation to me follow my channel, contacted me, and we have become friends as a result. But I cannot understate the importance of having a social network of friends who are in a similar position to yourself and can swap stories, can stop frustrations, can share advice, and just be there for each other. So we finally come to my number 10 challenge, and it may come as a surprise to you, but my number 10 is the weather here. But Andrew, you say, it's Greece, it's hot. Yes, in the summer it's hot, really hot. It can be 40, 45 degrees in July and August, and you need to be prepared for that. How are you going to manage living in that heat? Maybe you'll stay indoors all day. Well, that's not really a life. You can run the aircon. That's expensive. It gets hot here, and it's unrelenting in July and August. You should be prepared for that. But just Having said that, it also gets very cold here. At the moment, it looks nice and sunny. I'm wearing a thick coat. There's a reason I'm wearing a thick coat. It's about 8 or 9 degrees. Tonight, it will be 4 or 5 degrees. It does get cold in Greece, even down south in places like Athens. And if you live up north, there is snow right now. If you live in the mountains, there is snow right now, and you need to be prepared for that. How will you manage that? And when you're finding somewhere to live, when you're choosing a house, an apartment, whatever, I said you need to worry about insulation. I said you need to worry about the age of the property. This is why, because the climate here varies considerably from -4, -5 in the northern areas of Greece and some of the mountainous areas, up to 45 in the summer. So not only do you have to dress appropriately and have a wardrobe that's appropriate and a mentality that is ready for that, but you need to choose accommodation, lifestyle, etc., that you can fund and live within and allows you to manage that. Weather is a challenge here. So there we go. Greece, in my opinion, best place to live in Europe. I've lived here for a number of years. It's fantastic. The weather, the people, the culture, the food, the lifestyle. You cannot beat it here in Europe. But it's not without challenges, particularly when you start off. And if you follow my guide here, if you address those 10 challenges that I've talked about, I do think you'll be well on the way to living here and having a fantastic time. So I hope this has been useful. Thank you so much if you've watched to the end here. I really appreciate it. I will be doing more videos for you in the future. If you like this video, please throw me a subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.